Most terrible PC builds aren't made with cheap parts, they're made with great parts that hate each other. Because a PC isn't just a pile of hardware, it's an interconnected chain. You can put a flagship graphics card right next to a cheap power supply, but that power supply is the one deciding whether your $2,000 machine survives the month. So this isn't a best parts to buy list. It's the opposite. 18 ways people quietly sabotage their own builds, either draining their wallet or throwing away performance they already paid for. And before we get into the first one, consider subscribing. It takes one click for you, but it makes a huge difference for us. Thank you. Now, let's dive in. Buying a CPU for the wrong tasks. First build mistake, falling in love with the CPU. It's got the biggest number on the box, so it feels like the part that matters most. People blow a huge chunk of budget on a flagship Core i9 or Ryzen 9 for a machine that's only ever going to game. Here's the nuance though. At 4K, the GPU really is doing most of the work. So a mid-range CPU paired with a strong GPU is usually the smart move, but drop down to 1080p, especially high refresh competitive gaming, and the CPU actually starts to matter a lot more, since it has to prepare frames fast enough to keep up with a GPU that isn't the bottleneck anymore. So the right call depends on what you're actually playing and at what resolution, not a blanket rule. Underpowered CPU coolers. Even with the right CPU, a cheap little heatsink can hold it back fast. Modern CPUs are built to run hot on purpose, pushing toward their thermal limit to extract every bit of speed they can. But that limit isn't universal. It varies by chip and generation. Some run comfortably around 90 degrees Celsius. Others are rated well past 100 degrees Celsius. What is universal is the mechanism. If your cooler can't remove heat fast enough, the CPU throttles itself to stay safe, and clock speeds drop. Under a sustained gaming or rendering load, that can mean noticeably lower, less consistent performance, plus a fan running flat out trying to compensate. Underpowered motherboard, VRMs. There's a second heat-related bottleneck hiding on the motherboard, the VRMs, which handle power delivery to the CPU. Cheap boards often use weaker VRMs. Pair one with a power-hungry CPU under a sustained heavy workload, and those VRMs can overheat, forcing the board to pull back the CPU's power and clock speed, even if your cooler is doing its job perfectly. Worth noting, this isn't as common a problem as it used to be. Plenty of reasonably priced boards today handle demanding CPUs just fine. It becomes a real issue specifically with genuinely weak boards, high-power chips, overclocking, or poor case airflow. Overpriced motherboards for mid-range builds. Now the opposite mistake, buying a flagship, RGB-covered, over-engineered motherboard for a locked mid-range CPU. All that premium power delivery, largely wasted. It's built for a chip that pulls way more current than yours ever will. It's a race fuel tank on a car that takes regular gas. Overpowered GPU for 1080p gaming. Buying too good of a graphics card for your monitor is a real thing. Put a flagship GPU, something like an RTX 5090, which starts around $2,000, behind a 1080p monitor, and you can run into a CPU bottleneck. The GPU is capable of producing frames faster than the CPU can prepare them. Exactly how much of the card's potential goes unused depends heavily on the game, the specific CPU, your settings, and the frame rate you're chasing. It's not a fixed number, but unless you're specifically chasing extremely high frame rates for competitive play, that kind of GPU is often overkill for a 1080p setup. Weak GPU for 4K displays. The reverse, and often the more frustrating version. Pair a gorgeous 4K monitor with a weak or budget GPU, and demanding games can genuinely struggle. 4K means 4 times the pixels of 1080p, and that's a real load increase. That said, it's not automatically unplayable. Plenty of games run fine at 4K on modest hardware, especially with upscaling turned on. And that's the other correction worth making. Modern upscaling tech like DLSS FSR or XESS isn't just stretching a 1080p image. These render at a lower internal resolution and then intelligently reconstruct detail, which looks meaningfully better than old-school scaling. So a weaker GPU paired with good upscaling can still deliver a solid 4K experience. Just don't expect max settings, native res performance from budget hardware. Choosing cases solely on aesthetics. This one's not about speed, it's about whether your PC physically closes. Cases that look stunning in photos are often built small. Modern GPUs can run past 300 millimeters and eat 3+ slots of thickness, and a lot of compact cases just can't fit them, or leave no room for a front radiator. Check the max cooler height and motherboard size too, or you might end up mid-build, unable to shut the side panel, populating all 4 DDR5 slots. Sounds harmless, often isn't. You'd think 4 RAM sticks beats 2, but running 4 DIMMs puts significantly more electrical load on the memory controller than 2 do, which can force lower speeds or reduce stability. It's not guaranteed. Plenty of 4-stick setups run fine, but it's common enough to be a real risk. There are documented real-world cases of high-end systems needing to drop a rated DDR5 6000 kit all the way down to DDR5 4800 just to stay stable with 4 sticks installed. If you want the safest path to your kit's advertised speed, 2 DIMMs is generally the easier setup. Mixing different RAM kits. 2 kits, same brand, same model number, same speed, should be identical. They're often not. Manufacturers swap the actual chips inside RAM sticks without changing the box or label, so your first kit and your matching second kit might use completely different chips underneath. Mix them, and your board struggles to stabilize timing. Best case, you miss the rated speed. Worst case, random blue screen. Buying the wrong memory profile. Here's a common misunderstanding. XMP and EXPO are not two different types of RAM. They're both pre-configured memory profiles designed to make hitting high speeds easy. You flip one setting in the BIOS instead of manually tuning voltages and timings yourself. XPO is optimized for AMD platforms. XMP is Intel's version of the same idea. Most modern motherboards can read a profile from the other ecosystem too, but compatibility and stability there can vary kit to kit and board to board. So don't just shop for DDR5-6000 and assume you're set. Check whether that specific kit is validated for your specific CPU and motherboard combo. Gen 5 SSDs for pure gaming. Convincing spec sheet, often underwhelming real-world payoff. Gen 5 SSDs post huge sequential speed numbers, but that's not the whole story for gaming. Games use a mix of sequential and random access, and newer tech like direct storage is actively changing how much storage speed matters for load times and streaming assets. What's still true, for most ordinary gaming today, the jump from a good Gen 4 drive to Gen 5 is hard to justify, especially since Gen 5 drives run hotter, need bulkier heat sinks, and cost noticeably more. Some specific workloads do benefit. This just usually isn't one of them. QLC SSDs for heavy write workloads. Good instinct, worth being precise about. Budget SSDs often use QLC memory to hit a lower price point, and it's well documented that once a QLC drives fast, SLC cache fills up during a long sustained write. Speeds can drop off sharply. That part's real. Where it's worth being careful, this doesn't apply evenly to every QLC drive. Newer QLC designs have gotten meaningfully better at sustaining performance, and how bad the slowdown is depends on the specific drive. Same with lifespan. QLC generally has lower write endurance than TLC on paper, but that doesn't automatically mean a QLC drive will fail sooner in typical everyday use. Ignoring port selection and I/O layout. Nothing to do with raw power, everything to do with why won't this plug in? People get laser focused on CPU and GPU specs and forget to check USB ports, fan headers, or whether the board even has enough connections for their gear. And there's a sneaky one. Your case's front panel USB-C needs a matching header on the board, or that port just sits there, dead. Partial component incompatibilities. Everyone knows an Intel chip won't fit an AMD socket. The mistakes that actually get people are the partial ones, where everything works, just not at full potential. A more realistic example these days, a Gen 5 SSD dropped into a Gen 4 slot or a graphics card running in a lower bandwidth PCIe slot than it's capable of using. PCIe is backward compatible, so the system boots and runs completely fine. You're just quietly leaving performance on the table because the component is capped by the slot it's plugged into rather than by anything it's actually capable of. Ignoring the platform upgrade path. This one won't hurt today. It'll hurt in 2 or 3 years. Build on a CPU socket that's on its way out, and when your chip eventually becomes the bottleneck, you can't just drop in a newer one. No support. So a simple CPU swap turns into a whole new motherboard, new CPU, maybe new RAM too. Cheap and underpowered power supplies. The power supply is not a part to cheap out on, but let's be precise about why. High-end components draw power in sharp, aggressive spikes, and a quality PSU has real protection circuitry. Overvoltage, overcurrent, short-circuit protection, specifically designed to absorb those spikes and shut down safely if something goes wrong. That protection is a big part of what you're actually paying for. A cheap, unbranded unit is far more likely to skip or skimp on that circuitry, which raises the real risk of instability, unexpected shutdowns, or component damage over time. It's not accurate to say a failing PSU will typically send a surge through your whole system and fry everything at once. That's an extreme, worst-case outcome, not the normal one, but it is accurate that a poorly protected PSU meaningfully raises your risk profile for the rest of your build. Buying used parts without verification. Buying used can save serious money. Buying used blind is a different story. It's a common myth that GPUs used for mining are automatically damaged. Mining itself doesn't inherently destroy the VRAM. The real risks with any used GPU are things you genuinely can't see in a listing photo: unknown total usage, fan wear, thermal cycling, thermal paste or pads that have dried out over time, a modified BIOS, physical damage, or simply no warranty left to fall back on. If you can't watch the card run a stress test in front of you, you're taking those risks on faith. Shady third-party marketplace sellers. A real scam pattern worth knowing about, without overstating how common it is. A GPU listed hundreds below market price on a big retail site can feel like a steal, and it's worth checking who's actually shipping it before you buy. There are documented cases of buyers receiving boxes of metal bolts weighted to match a GPU's shipping weight, or old cards with a modified BIOS pretending to be a modern chip. To be fair, plenty of legitimate third-party sellers exist too, so this isn't a reason to avoid marketplace listings entirely, just a reason to check seller ratings and reviews before jumping on a price that looks too good to be true. The pattern across all 18 is simple. A good build isn't about buying the most expensive thing in every slot. It's about making sure every part actually works with the others. Cooler matched to CPU, GPU matched to monitor, and PSU matched to the system. Get it right, and every part works together to give you exactly what you paid for. Get it wrong, and even the best hardware can end up wasting its potential.